I'm going to stop it right now and then. Okay, so we're going to mute it here at tech support and you're in charge, Stuart. Or April's in charge, I guess.
Actually, April is in charge.
Okay, so we're going to mute going on. We're going to be here, but we'll be on mute.
Okay. Hello, Brian.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good.
Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Okay, now we're starting to pick up here.
I apologize for being late. I always think it's
No,
gonna.
you're not late. We haven't started yet. We're still looking to get a quorum here.
Oh, that's true.
Warren has just joined us.
Where are you today, Brian?
Oh, I'm at home.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
Is that in
Yeah, no,
Cambridge?
yep, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I was born there.
Oh,
Yeah.
were you born at the Cambridge City Hospital?
I was born at St. Elizabeth's.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Lived there for just about maybe 6 or 7 years.
Okay,
So I don't remember too much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's all very different.
Oh, I'm
it's
sure. I'm
Not
sure.
quite as nice as Vermont, but it's a nice place to be.
Yeah. That's why you come visit so much, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I can't come this month just due to other conflicts, but I think in January I might get up there twice. So
Good. Good. Weather should be great for you.
hopefully.
I'm going to have to get off for a second, folks. Marsh can't find the Zoom link, so I got to get that to him.
Okay.
Hi, Margie.
Hi, Gail. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So we're waiting, let's see, Marsh. Oh, we're missing a few people, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Jim's unable to join us this
I had a
meeting.
little quirky stuff with the link, so.
And I know Clark's in Alaska. I don't know if he has access to the Zoom.
He's
I
gonna
think
try to
it's-
log on.
Yeah.
He tried
that
to
was-
come to our meeting Tuesday and he wasn't able to do it.
Oh,
So we did it just by phone.
So hopefully, if he was able to call into yours, he'll be able to at least call into this one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice, okay.
So as soon as Stu comes back with Marsh, he's gonna read the number. So maybe that will help Clark connect with us too.
Yeah, Clark
Okay.
said he was going to try to call in. Apparently, all of the technical stuff is not quite set up where he is in Alaska, so he's going to do his best. So here, Marsh should be coming along soon. I just sent him on to the, and I think that would give us a quorum, wouldn't it? 2, 4, 6, 7. Yeah, we've got a quorum. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Safety and Equity Task Force. You can join the meeting via Zoom by going to the town website under Select Board tab. If you wish to dial in, the number is 646-558-8656 and enter the webinar ID number 864-6641-5624 and follow the prompts. You can watch the meeting at the physical location at the fire facility at 130 River Street, 3rd floor. Attendees will be able to participate in public comment by Zoom, phone, and at the firehouse location. Attendees can view the meeting but must be recognized to speak. If you wish to raise your hand as an attendee, you have to be recognized by the chair. That would be *9 by telephone. And when prompted, you would press *6 to speak. And with that, the meeting can begin.
Okay, great. Just because we're a little behind, we're going to go through introductions very fast. So I am April Dunham. And then I'm gonna call the next person next to me is Lynn.
I am Lynn Mazza, and I'm gonna call Sarah Beth.
Hi, I'm Sarah Beth Ward. I will call Gail.
Gail Harbor. Hi, I will call Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Core from NACOL, and I will call Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Wilcox. I will call Margay.
Hi, Margay Diamond. Stu,
Yes, and I'm Stuart Hurd. I'm the staff for this esteemed committee.
Okay, so I think we got everyone. So we really want to be respectful of everyone's time and really just try to stay on target. So what we're going to do for at least the Zoom meeting is do like a 5-minute warning before we transition to the next session. So we do want to hear everyone's comments and get everybody's intake and everything. At the same time, we be respectful of our time. So our goal is to start on time and end on time, but feel free to put in your input. That's really what we're here for. And then the first thing I'd like to do is make a motion just to add Brian and Cami. Just they had a comment that they had been receiving questions and had some challenges in answering them. So I was just going to let them add that to the conversation. So if I can have a motion to amend the agenda. So under number 2, recap of last minutes, we could add Brian and Cami to that. And you guys may be muted. I just need a motion in a second.
I make a motion to change agenda item 2 to add Brian and Cammie's comments.
Second,
second that.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Who seconded? I'm sorry.
Gail,
Margay and Sarah Beth, I believe. Or Gail.
Everybody.
Gail.
everybody.
Yeah.
And so I guess it was a unanimous vote. Did I miss that? I don't know.
I think so. Oh,
Yeah,
Pretty
so,
much.
okay.
okay, and then before we get to that, I'm just going to do a quick recap of the last minutes. So last meeting, we spoke with our outreach committee. We brought our surveys that we completed, discussed what we saw, what trends we saw, and how many we completed, members that we spoke with. We also did a review of the complaint process that was given to us by the Bennington Police Department complaint log. So we had discussion on that. We also heard for the composition oversight committee, who's going to be presenting today. We ended up delaying them to this next meeting. And then we heard from the scope subcommittee as well too. And that's pretty much sums up the notes from last time. Does anybody have any changes for minutes for last time? Okay, do we accept the minutes from last meeting? Okay, any,
So I make a motion to accept the minutes.
great. And do we have to do, I forget, a roll call on this or a yay from everybody?
Stu, do we need everyone?
I would say, I think, yeah, you need a motion and a second and then an actual vote.
So,
Yeah,
motion-
If the vote is unanimous, you needn't do a roll call.
okay, so a motion to accept the minutes?
Aye.
Did we
Okay.
have a second?
Seconded.
No, seconded. And I apologize, trying to find everyone on screen. I just want to make sure I'm catching everybody. Okay, great. So that takes care of that part. And then we're going to move on to our first item, which we just added, which is to Brian and Cami.
So it seems so formal, and this is really just a quick thing. And unfortunately, some of the people that sent me questions aren't on yet. But Cami and I have received a number of questions, all reasonable, but it's just been very challenging for either of us to sort of address them as they come in. And we've intended to, and just between the NACOL things and my own work, we've just been too busy. So just wanted to let people know that we're not ignoring the questions, but maybe what we can do is, as things come up, you know, people from different subcommittees could raise them. And Cami can't be here as well because of a conflict with, I think, something in Santa Barbara, California. So I will do my best to answer questions. And I do want to acknowledge that I think part of the reason the questions were coming in is that subcommittees were hoping for our input as they did their work. And it's just, we're doing the best we can, but we're a little stretched. So I just wanted to let people know and acknowledge that. And thanks for giving me a second to say that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Okay, the next item of our agenda is defining task force and the final output. So basically, what are charges?
I really wish Marsh was here.
I know.
Anybody
He
have
is
any
having, Marsh is
staff?
having trouble connecting to the Zoom link, and Jonah is trying to help him as we speak.
You might consider taking up a different agenda item and coming back to it. Oh, and there's Marsh, named Stuart Hurd.
I always wanted to be used to,
There he is.
Yeah.
or at least 15 seconds.
This is
you
very
may not enjoy
confusing.
that very much. I can.
I'm now the town manager, in case you didn't notice.
Yeah, that makes you the staff person, Marsh. So
Ah!
all right, Brian, I think you can go forward then.
All right, so as April was just saying, our third item on the agenda, that's where we're at, Marsh,
Thank you.
is defining our final input, or yeah, output, excuse me. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I was feeling that as a whole, we hadn't quite reached consensus on what our actual deliverables look like. And when I am hearing concerns from people about timeline and what a timeline looks like and how are we going to get all this done, we kind of have to know what the end result is and work backwards, right? So I wanted to spend a few minutes kind of going around and having everybody articulate what is it you think we're delivering by the end of this work session, not today, but right, our group. What's our deliverables to the select board? I guess is the best way to sum it up. I'd like to hear everyone articulate that and then flush out where we might have some differences of opinion. Come on, Marsh, you know you want to talk.
Well, you know, I'm a retired preacher and I don't have a pulpit anymore, so I can't help myself. So I don't have this comprehensive overview, but I think we need to have our purpose, our description of what the composition of the board is, and we need to have our complaint complement process, the things we're working on, what's the other one? I guess one of the questions I had about this myself was whether we need to, it seems like when we have the subcommittee that I'm on working on two things, duties and powers, and we have another one, I see Lynn right next to me, working on, what's the word I'm looking for, Lynn?
Scope.
Scope, yes. It seems like probably these are pretty much the same thing. So that's one of my questions about content. But, you know, I think we're working hard on all those areas. I'm not sure. I guess those are the things that I think we've got to do.
Great.
Short sermon.
Up in Margay.
Yeah, Stu, I see your hand up. You can go ahead.
Sorry.
I'll just read the charge to you again. And this is from the select board's original document. The Safety and Equity Task Force shall develop recommendations for the name, scope, structure, membership, and responsibilities of a community safety and equity board. Areas of focus will include recommendations on police department training and community collaboration efforts, a review of complaints against the PD, a development and review of a proposed critical Bennington Police Department policies and procedures, an analysis of safety and equity data. And the deliverable is considered to be a written recommendation, which should go to the select board after your January 30th deadline. And then the recommendations at the select board level would be discussed through February and March with public comment. So you've got to prepare some sort of a report that covers those basic areas, and you're working on them all. I agree with Marsh. You're working on scope, you're working on purpose. We decided to leave name until the last. You've already got some suggestions on the number of members and what their qualifications should be. So I think you're moving in the right direction. At some point, somebody on the committee is going to have to pull that all together into some sort of a report document.
Yeah, and I think Brian's point last time we met keeps sticking in my mind. We do need to, once we get our separate little pieces done, we need to check and see how they relate to each other. So we have a purpose statement. It would be nice if that actually related to the other things. And so sometime we've got to sit down and look at the different pieces and see how they fit with each other and reshape the puzzle pieces so that they link up. But I think we got to get the pieces ready first.
Yeah,
Right.
that's my thought, is that we need to come to some kind of consensus on what the purpose is and what the scope is. Our subcommittee worked on community input and tried to align it with the other research that we'd done. And we came up with some specific recommendations, all of which can be presented to the select board as a document that includes some of those other areas like community collaboration and police education. So we can kind of fold that together. But I think we're at a point where we really need to say, let's look at the purpose statement and try to come to some kind of agreement, either by a vote or by more work on it, and do the same then with scope and do the same then with, what's the third big one? Oh, composition. But I think we need to take hold of them one at a time and say let's say that piece is the best we can do. We're not going to be perfect. It's not going to include everything under the sun. But I think my concern is that we do this in a timely manner, because to me, with all of the issues that have surfaced, it's a disservice if we don't pass something along so that we can get to forming the committee that will do the actual work and collaborating with the police to make us a better community in general.
I see a couple of hands up. We're going to start with Brian and then Lynn after Brian.
Oh, thank you. I'll just say quickly, since Marcia invoked me a little bit, I think that it's an opportunity for me to speak. You might think about one of the next couple of meetings. I'm not quite sure if it's the next meeting or the one after that. After the subcommittees have done their work and sort of processed it a bit with the full committee, just devoting some time on the agenda to just kind of seeing how they fit together. And maybe one way to think about that is thinking about what that final report is going to look like, what the sections are based on the charge, and then kind of what that flow is, and taking some time just to compare and make sure these things all fit together. Because I think you're right that you want each subcommittee to do its work, bring it back to the full committee, but you also need to spend some time kind of comparing and making sure it all flows and works together. But I think that's really kind of a matter of putting something on the agenda and then taking the time in that meeting to really go through that, not just a 20-minute thing. So that's my suggestion at this moment. It could change.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And Lynn's next.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm seeing a lot of overlap in the various things people write. So I think one of our big jobs is going to actually to be editing out a lot of places where our ideas overlap. Something I was going to say about, I agreed with Gail and now I'm forgetting. I was going to dovetail to something what Gail said and now I can't remember. I'm sorry. Hopefully it'll come back to me.
Who else had their hand up?
Just those two, unless someone else has a comment.
I remember.
Oh, Lynn, go ahead.
I think maybe it might make sense to make like an outline of what our final document's going to look like, and then kind of plug our different sections into that broader outline.
Our charge sort of offers a lovely outline. Unless we've got a better one or want to improve on it.
Well, I think you're saying just sort of set up a template, right? And start piecing things in, right? So yeah, I see your head nodding. Yes, I like that idea. I also wonder if we should put together some kind of timetable so we can put a stake in the ground about when things are due. Like, you know, like there's gonna be points where we don't have everyone like today, but if we can maybe think ahead from now until D-Day, when we need to deliver this and back up so that we know when we really have to put a stake in the ground and give ourselves a little wiggle room in case we don't capture everyone. Lynn?
My other question was, and it's kind of what you were saying, brought it up, was, and Stu would probably know the answer to this. So we'll have this, you know, written report that we'll give. Are we also expected to like present at a select board meeting? That was my understanding, but I'm not sure if that's right. And then in which case we would need to add to our timeline and our due date, developing our presentation and who's going to actually talk and what would that look like? Do we need to do a verbal presentation, Stu?
Well, I think that would be appropriate. And I think that can occur after your January deadline at a regular select board meeting. You folks could all be present, and you know, one or two of you could make the presentation of your report to the board. That makes it formal, and perhaps gives you the folks the recognition for all the work you've done over these last several months. But I think when it comes to timelines, I think if not this meeting, certainly next meeting, you really should start to establish what is the purpose. And that can be a very short statement. I mean, the work that Sarah Beth, Ben, Clark, and Marsh did, I mean, if you funnel those, and I don't know whether you all have that with you, but if you funnel that draft that was done on 11/15 into a brief paragraph, it really says what the purpose could be. And it talks about rebuilding and sustaining trust, increasing levels of communication, collaboration, and even-handedness, building accountability, and creating an approach of respect and service among the Bennington Police Department and the community. Something that short, and it doesn't have to be Pulitzer Prize worthy.
And I think if we draft
Doing
something,
that, and I think that's the same thing with the scope. And I think that's, you know, you guys have done quite a bit of work, and if you look at it all you've really got to do is pull it together and then start, you know, adding some additional detail to make the report, you know, worthwhile.
So maybe the thing to do is to assign ourselves the homework of everybody going home and really taking a look at that purpose statement and wordsmithing it, and then we'll put on the agenda next time to really focus on purpose. And that was just a suggestion.
Time.
I'm seeing
I
what
mean,
people think.
I'm only the staff guy, but I think really it's time if you're going to start to formulate this. And I think the resources that Brian sent you, all of those other documents already have statements of purpose.
Mhm.
And those can be utilized to give you a feel for what you want to say, that you think the purpose of this next board should be.
I see Gail has her hand up.
Yes, I think going back to Marcia's concern about having Brian help us define the purpose from the scope again, that might be helpful at this time. And I also think for the wordsmithing that I think we should, if we had I don't know about your open meeting law stuff, but if we had a person that, if we all reviewed it, if we could put a concern or express something to the person who is doing the wordsmithing, not all of us wordsmithing, then one person could maybe have something to present with input from each task force member next week or 2 weeks.
I just want to caution us on time. We have 3 minutes left for this agenda item, but I do see Marsh has his hand up.
The other thing, when we're looking at the materials that our subcommittee did on purpose, it would be really great if the other subcommittees would look at what they've done and how it relates to that statement of purpose. Are there things in the statement of purpose that nobody has addressed? Are there things in the statement of purpose that really aren't a priority to go on the front page? Have we really done the things that, you know, so that the purpose really represents the work we're doing in the detailed areas?
Mhm.
Do people feel like we could put purpose and scope to a vote, like an acceptance vote by next meeting? If everyone does their homework and does some comparison, contrast? Could there be
Yes.
like
Yes.
revised / preliminary final versions that go up before the next meeting to actually be voted on? So we're like moving along? Because I
think-
think the complaint
Is-
process is gonna take us a long time.
Yeah, is the scope draft okay? I guess that's a question.
I think the scope draft still needs a little more work. It definitely needs some more editing and there are a few things, but I think that's on the discussion tonight. I think we can
Okay.
probably get through that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we had the complaint process out in there tonight. The scope is another topic for another meeting. But that's okay. I think that we could probably work on it in our subcommittee group and then hopefully have something to present to the board, the
maybe,
task force.
maybe what we do is for these sections, is all of us go home, see if what our subcommittee did matches purpose, matches scope, and then we can name like one person from the purpose subcommittee and one person from the scope committee to kind of gather everybody's comments and kind of collate them into a final draft. Send that out to the group over the week, see if there's any final edits, and then be ready for next meeting to actually vote on it. I think that's a good idea, Margay. I think, I mean, it's gonna take some emails and some homework over the week, but I think it's doable.
So I'm gonna take Marsh and he'll be the last comment for this one. And then we'll move on to the next agenda item. Sorry to cut us short, but Marsh, if you want to go ahead. Can you not hear us?
Hmm.
Oh.
Marsh, your audio must be going out because everything else is working.
He can't hear us, so.
Yeah, yeah. Can-
I
Are we,
didn't see his little microphone next to his name.
Yeah.
I can't hear,
just
yeah.
gonna jump Excuse me, it's Jean here, the tech support. You guys need to be really careful with open meeting law stuff. I don't think you can do what you just said you were gonna do. One person can work on something alone and then bring it back to the group. So every time, Brian, you probably know this even better than I. But you can't all go home and comment on each other's work and formulate it like that. I know that that is not legal. Okay,
Wonder
I'll
if
just
we
say
need-
thank you, Gene, because I think I was thinking they meant people
Oh,
in
what
each
did I just do?
subcommittee, not the whole.
Yeah, I
Whole
agree,
committee.
Brian. I was thinking the subcommittees were going to be working together.
That's what I thought too.
So if the subcommittees are working together, could we, not on the subcommittee, send an email to one person on the subcommittee? I think,
I think if that would basically be the same as keep the whole committee kind of meeting serially. So I think within a subcommittee, people could do that, but I think to have everyone on this whole task force doing that would be a problem because then you're still
I agree.
basically, yeah.
okay.
I agree.
We have a career as open meeting law consultants in the future, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Marsh, we can hear you. Can you hear us again?
Yeah, I left and came back and it works now. Thank you.
So it sounds like what we left off is the subcommittees are going to work together in their subcommittee groups to draft something that we'll discuss at the next meeting because we can't discuss it independently, as a group together.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
and then hopefully we'll get a step closer to we're going to aim for a final draft and we'll discuss it at the next meeting. Marsh, I can
Hello.
see your lips moving, but I can't hear you.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Clark, that's
Hey,
you.
Clark.
Hi, Clark, how you doing?
Hi,
Well,
Clark.
I apologize.
Oops.
You're in and out, Clark.
Okay, well, I apologize, but to keep us on track, I am going to move to the next item and hopefully Clark and Marsh can join us. So the next item is the Outreach Subcommittee report out.
So Stu circulated the compilation of responses to everyone. I thought in the interest of time for today's meeting that we would not go into any depth of detail about the particular comments which are summarized on there. I think it's better for us to spend a little time on the report. Like, what did we learn? What did we sort of capture from all of that? And Gail, you did a lot of work on this, so I think you should present it. And that was the document you also sent out in advance to everyone. Hopefully people had a chance to look.
Yeah, yes. So what we thought we could do from the subcommittee is submit something either as an addendum to the other portions of what we're going to submit. I mean, it does relate to police education. It relates to community collaboration. It relates to some policies and procedures. So what we did is the three of us looked at other resources, took all of the work that Margay did in summarizing or listing and categorizing all of the comments from our community. And our goal is that we would try to identify trends to submit as specific recommendations for consideration of the community board once it's established. And so we took I don't know if you want me to read, do you have time for me to read through all of this stuff, or?
We have 15 minutes, so
Okay.
we're a little over time, so we're going to be
All right.
ending in about 10 minutes.
Okay, so I think I can do this quickly then. So we wanted, number one, to assure that the community board would be functioning independently of the police and the select board, which should be part, I believe, of our scope or purpose statement anyway. And then we looked at police education, which was a theme we picked out of needs. And we wanted to commend the police department on what they've done with Rule 13 so far, and that we wanted to recommend to the board that they continue to monitor compliance with this policy and that they assess and support the challenges of the Bennington Police Department for time and money to assure this education can be completed in a timely manner. To review specifically the areas of de-escalation, fair and impartial policing, which are all part of the Rule 13. To provide tools like inherent bias testing to broaden self-awareness in the police force, probably for all of us, we should probably all do that. Communication skills, that active listening, validation of concerns expressed, and recognition of nonverbal tools such as early signs of escalation, deep distress, and the need for physical space should be emphasized in police education. And then we also address self-management tools for self-care of police officers, identifying availability and the use by officers of professional support persons in the community, and what else can be done to support the officers who have chosen a very stressful career, because we know that stress leads to mistakes. I think I have another page here somewhere. Maybe not.
While she's getting that other page, Stu, can I ask you to send out a copy of Rule 13?
Yes, you can.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay. So we went on to talk about community service and organizations and agency collaboration, which seemed to be a trend that they've made, the Bennington Police Department, recognizing that they've made many efforts to provide programs in formal groups, and they've accepted invitations to organizations to talk about their work. But based on what we heard, we recommend continued brainstorming, acknowledging the practical limitations of of staff but on how to extend outreach programs, including examining the possibilities of more visibility on the streets. And we heard that as kind of a theme, particularly for safety reasons in the evenings and with our increase in drug usage in town. Policies and procedures, we recommend a careful review of the Citizens Police complaint policy. We know that there's a new one out there, but we wanted to assure a way for all citizens to have a method of lodging a complaint other than directly through the Bennington Police Department. Consider availability of the confidential email address to the community board members, paper copies available at agencies who may be of assistance in filing and submitting a complaint. A locked public Dropbox was suggested that could be accessed weekly or bi-weekly by a community board member. Assuring there's a checklist of expectations to be completed by the Bennington Police Department to fairly complete an investigation, including reporting back to the complainant throughout, or at least at the conclusion of the investigation. The policy should include a timetable for completing the investigation with clear expectations to a response resolution. To provide oversight to the process, assure that the board is made aware of every complaint at the time it is made and has access to all information related to the complaint, monitors the timeliness of completing the investigation and reviews all the steps were followed fairly for every formal complaint. Provide education related to filing a complaint, including the difference between and the expectations for lodging an informal and a formal complaint. Address multiple learning styles on the town website, on the BPD website, in the town offices and local organizations who may assist citizens with filing a complaint. Education should include information about the complaint review by a community board to help instill trust about transparency of the complaint process. Assure that all persons responsible for receiving a complaint have been appropriately educated, including but not limited to using respectful approach in explaining the differences between formal and informal complaints and what should and should not be expected as a result of putting forth the concern or complaint. And offer the opportunity to complete a section on demographics, explaining its use in monitoring fair and equal treatment for all. Data collection to provide support. The board would provide support and accountability to the Bennington Police Department in trending fair and impartial policies. Policies should include the collection of data, real or perceived, related to gender, race, and ethnicity, religion, economical, educational, mental, and physical status. Consider data collected at traffic stops, arrests, documenting formal complaints. So those were kind of the headings about data collection, policies and procedures. Although they'll have oversight over any, I'm sure, we saw this complaint as the largest that loomed, and community service and collaboration with concerned community services and police education. That's what we came up with after
Thank you, Gail.
49, I think, right, Margie? 49 separate complaints you looked at.
Interviews, yes.
Interviews, excuse me, yes. We
As
looked at,
stated, some of those people represented multiple, they were representing their constituency and the organization, but they were counted as one interview. So I think we got a lot of rich commentary. It wasn't surprising, right? It mirrors the IACP report. It mirrors other comments that I see have come forward on the town survey. So I think we're on the right track in terms of identifying core issues. And that was a really great report, Gail.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that was really well written.
Yes, thank you. I just want to.
You will note on the screen the 1907 number. I believe that is Clark.
Right, yes, I'm here in and out. We're minus 35 and the only thing working is the heater. So excuse me.
Sorry, Clark. That sounds rough. I just want to caution us, we only have about 3 minutes left on this topic. And I see Lynn's had her hand up, but Stu, I wasn't sure if you had something to add.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that all of these all of these recommendations around the complaint policy. I will go through the complaint policy draft that we've written and kind of check this document against that document to make sure that all these are covered in the complaint process one. Am I making sense? Yeah, so I'll get that done before the next meeting to kind of compare those two. And then I think that the data collection part and the community service and collaboration pieces, those are actually addressed in the scope document. So I'll also double check those against scope. So just to make sure that all of that's what's in here is represented in those other pieces.
That's great.
Okay.
So are we talking about the complaints directly coming into the committee? So we are the committee that's being formed, that the complaints are going to come to them?
That is the suggestion.
Okay.
That's what I think that's a whole other
and-
conversation.
Okay, because we had some discussion about that in our subcommittee. I don't know if we want to talk about that now or if we want to wait about, and talk about that a different time.
We have a
I think
complaint.
I think what our subcommittee was putting forth is that the board, the community board, should receive the complaint at the same time. So if it goes to the police station, it should be in some way copied to this board right away so that the board has access to it.
Okay, so they will just get it at the same time.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
all
There wasn't a suggestion that there's any independent investigations going on. It was
Okay.
merely to provide people with a feeling of safety.
Okay,
Number one, right? Because there's some distrust of making a complaint about the police to the police.
okay.
So
it's
the
just-
idea was, could we put a measure in place so that people feel like somebody other than the police sees it as well?
Okay.
And then it
okay.
also, if that were to be an accepted thing, then it also would allow this oversight committee some ability to hold the timeline, hold people accountable to a timeline, whatever that looks like, right? So we know, their committee knows that there's 6 complaints out there, let's say, right?
Mhm.
And so in 3 weeks' time, somebody, when the committee meets, they can say, hey, what's going on with the 3 complaints? We're not
Okay.
waiting to get a report in about what's been received, right?
Okay, okay, all right.
And I'd like to add before March, I see you have your hand up. Our next part, our next agenda item, scope of practice, it actually took on the complaint process as well too. So I think we can kind of flow into that, the complaint part. But I wasn't sure if anyone had any more comments on the outreach subcommittee reports. And I see Marsh has his hand up.
Just quickly, in the community service organization and agency collaboration, there's a lovely description of the police department doing outward communication, telling people things. And I think somewhere in there, there was a longing in the interviews that I heard to be listened to. And I think listening would be good to be articulated in that paragraph somewhere if it seems fitting. The other thing that I wanted to draw attention to, but I didn't say, which I've said to Gail personally, but I'd like to say out loud to everybody, that this is just an amazing work. And I told her it blew my socks off there in my next door neighbor's yard. And the other thing was about collecting complaints, and 2 things about collecting complaints. I hope we'll think about collecting complaints and compliments and sort out whether they be done in a parallel fashion. But I really don't want to lose the attention to good things that are being done in this process. And the last thing is our subcommittee on purpose and composition talked about the possibility of an ombudsman who might play a sort of clerical role and help role connecting people who are concerned and need more attention in getting connected to who would help them and would help keep track of the complaints and the compliments and how that process is going, so that it is, there's sort of the idea that if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And if there was one person who was kind of the tag person, that might be helpful. That was just the idea that came up, and I'm not saying it ought to happen that way, but those are just some thoughts.
Great. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that document. It really outlined, I think, and touched on all those points. So thank you so much for that committee. So while we're on this oh, sorry, Stu, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, I also thought it was a pretty good document. And I don't know why you couldn't add composition of the committee to your next agenda. Because this is pretty much fills it in. And it's just a matter of agreeing that this is what you think you need. Gets one more step done.
Definitely. Any thoughts on that?
I guess I don't really understand what Stu meant, so.
Well, at your next meeting, you've got purpose and scope. You're going to try to resolve those things.
Okay,
I don't know why you couldn't also resolve the issue of composition of the committee, because
Yes.
you've done a pretty good job of outlining numbers, experience necessary, attributes. I think that's a great document that this committee did.
we had a few things left that we need to talk with everybody about, and we've highlighted them. Yep.
So if you'd like, we can move on to our next agenda item, which is scope of practice. And we actually focus on the complaint process. So I'm going to let Lynn, if you don't mind, start with this one.
Yeah, what do we get here? Looking at it backwards. Okay. Yeah, so did people get this document and get a chance to look at it? Because it's kind of thick, and I don't know if we want to like read through the whole thing. It brings up, let's see. It starts off with initiating the complaint. And it talks about creating maybe a centralized portal. All of these things, there's a whole bunch of different ways, but all of these go to the idea that people might not be comfortable walking into the police station to file a complaint. So in this one says like maybe a centralized portal, but then in these comments that we just got from the other, then we can talk about an ombudsman. The other idea that came up was also having the organizations around town, the social service organizations, appoint an ombudsman or appoint one person in their organization who's the liaison or police specialist or whatever you want to call it. So there's a bunch of ideas out there that all go to this idea of there being multiple doors into getting into that complaint process. And then it also says, like other people have mentioned, that when a complaint goes to the police, the oversight board would also be informed. But to the point that came up at the last meeting about the oversight committee acting as both an advocate in the beginning and a reviewer at the end, that kind of the board acting as a advocate has sort of been removed, and that role has then been assigned to the ombudsman, community organizations, and so on. So yeah, the citizens board would offer basic information about the complaint process and a referral to assistance. And there's a lot more detail to add into that. There was also something that somebody else suggested that needs to be added to this about training for the BPD staff, so that if somebody does come into the police station and say, I want to file a complaint, whoever they talk to is prepared to help them through that process, show them where the complaint form is, refer them to the ombudsman, whatever, so that no matter how they come to this, somebody will be able to tell them and help them through it. Then once that complaint has been initiated, the oversight board will kind of need to take a step back in terms of like not getting into the investigation part. There was that whole question about can an independent investigation and a police review happen simultaneously. And I spoke to the Attorney General's office this week and was told that there's no law precluding that from happening. But he said you can get into some sticky areas of like perceptions of witness tampering, or that kind of the oversight committee and the police are like bumping into each other while they're trying to do investigations. So generally the idea is that citizens oversight should wait. So the police do their formal investigation and then the board comes in afterwards if necessary, because it might be that the police investigation comes through and they take action and everything's fine and citizens oversight doesn't need to necessarily take any follow-up except to record that this happened and add it to the broader data. So yeah, so the police reports this investigation, and while the police are doing their investigation, citizens oversight's only role would be to just do check-ins. Marsh, I know you had concerns about the reporting time. Because you're thinking, well, somebody needs to wait 30 days to get something back.
After a decision is made, yeah.
Yeah, but you might want to give them time to, this is kind of built into the legalese. And this also might be something that the, whatchamacallit, the union has something to say about. At the end. So like the specifics of how many days we might have to hammer out later, but the broader idea is that when the person puts in a complaint, either the police department itself or the oversight committee will acknowledge receipt of that complaint, and then periodically get updates. So even if the police aren't done with their investigation, they can send out a little thing saying, we're still looking for this witness. So at least the person who did the complaint knows where they're at and knows that their complaint is actually being looked at, which will address that sense that people have that their complaints just sort of go into an abyss and they never hear anything again. So then after the police do their investigation, if anyone involved, including the officer themselves or a witness or the complainant, anybody who's involved can say, I think something's up here. We need to do a review. And then that triggers the citizens review to do a whole process that where it kind of jumped into the internal investigation review. Let's see, there was some questions about there being no time limit.
Lynn, I feel like Clark has some questions. I'm feeling,
Oh,
am I
I'm
hearing
sorry.
that? He can't raise his hand, so hold on, Clark.
In terms of a time limit on the process, I really can't think of any question to add on the fact that, once we acknowledge, the process is going forward and we just monitor progress or lack of progress on a complaint, that's the thing. It's kind of hard to put a hard and fast date on an investigation because we have to let it play out. We may get a couple answers in a few days, or it may take weeks to get answers that are appropriate for the concern. So I think the most important part of this element is having a sense date, a timeline where we know that every week we'll get a status report saying whatever's going on with that complaint. We don't have to get into the nitty gritty. We just have to hear that, yes, we're in the process and awaiting certain actions or responses. That's the most important part. I don't think we should apply an arbitrary date to completion. And of course, we don't want something dragging on 6 months either. But I think as long as there's a progress report and progress being made on resolutions, that should satisfy all parties. And of course, the complainant should be informed that, in fact, they have not been forgotten, because that's the common thread I've heard consistently. People think that they aren't listened to or nothing is done. But if a progress report is made to both the committee, the select board, and the complainant, I think that's just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree with you that you don't want to paint people into a corner and force them to rush an investigation or whatever. So adding wording about a weekly status report or a weekly progress report.
I think monthly is more what I've seen happen in other places, and it seems like weekly is asking a lot because the committee wouldn't want to be meeting every week.
No, I'm not saying that the committee would meet every week. I'm saying that the police department would send out a real informal, like, hey, week 2, we've interviewed 2 witnesses, we're looking for 2 more. Week 3, we've interviewed all the witnesses, now we're talking to our lawyer. So there's nothing really to discuss. They're just kind of reporting out the steps that they've taken. I think was the understanding.
I think Brian has his hand up too.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, I'm mostly trying to listen because I don't want to weigh in on everything. I will say, though, I do agree with that. I think requiring a weekly report when many weeks there may not be any progress, as opposed to every month when the committee meets, it gets a report about where things stand with open investigations. I mean, if it's it might be that this committee, once formed, decided that they didn't feel like they were getting enough information and wanted to ask for more regular reporting. But I think to sort of before that's even been formed, to recommend weekly reports might be burdensome. And I don't know how much information that would be for a task force. Every month they meet, and now we've got 4 separate reports about the progress. So that's all.
I don't disagree with that either in terms of getting reporting back from the police, like on every 30 days as an update. But that's a separate issue from responding to the complainant in a timely manner that their complaint has been received.
Exactly.
And some kind of status report to them, right? Which Clark, you pointed out too, like keep people in the loop was the theme. Let me know I'm not forgotten. So as the task force is reviewing things every 30 days, the person who made the complaint ought to be just as up to date.
Right. I think the only difference is what we're talking about is weekly or monthly, and it seems like monthly is enough.
I'm wondering if we're actually talking, as Margay pointed out, though, I'm wondering if we're talking about 2 different things here, because one would be like, the details of this specific investigation going directly to the complainant, and the other would be a monthly report about how many complaints we've got and where we're at with them. That would be broader.
Unfortunately, I can't do a hands up. I apologize. If I seem rude for jumping in, I apologize. I think you're right that there are 2 separate issues. There's, that the statistical analysis or record, I think, is more for the internal use of this proposed committee, and a status report for the complainant, so that they and the other principals will realize that, yes, you have not been forgotten, and we are taking steps to address your concerns. So, I think that's very important that people realize we are helping them. But, again, there's in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, I see there's internal data for the board and then information for the complainants.
I agree with Clark on that. I think that not all data would be okay to share with maybe the complainant if the investigation's still going on. But maybe they do want to share it with the task force or the committee once formed. At the same time, having that communication, because that's what I'm hearing, is people aren't feeling heard or concerns are addressed. We should be giving them some type of update. And I see Brian has his hand up too.
Yeah, I'm sorry to talk again, but just a small thing. I think there's also, you want to think about what is the work of, we'll call it the task force, versus what would this group be saying should be the BPD policy on how it handles complaints, because that's getting into saying, we believe BPD needs to do weekly, monthly check-ins, reports back to the complainants, or is that, unless that's something the board's planning to do, which could also be complicated. So I think just, it's more of a general thing to just be thoughtful about what is sort of where this group is asking the police department to do versus what this is laying out as what the work of the future body will be that gets established.
I also concur from a administrative standpoint. I think we want to be respectful about what we're asking from BPD and how often, so that they can actually do their job. So I think every 30 days feels good to me, and I wouldn't necessarily be looking for any grotesque amount of detail at that point. I would want to know this case is still active. We are still researching it. This case has been closed out. Now I want to see like what was the end result and does everybody feel good about that? Like that's more where I think we dive in deeper when at the conclusion part. But I'm not sure that this committee needs a blow-by-blow report of how many people have been interviewed and when on each investigation every week. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think makes a lot of sense. Well,
I think-
I think the chief made it clear too, their administrative support is kind of sketchy at times too. So we, again, as previously stated, we have to be cognizant of the additional burden we may be placing on other entities to get this information circulated. So.
And Lynn has her hand up, and then we'll skip to Gail after too.
Go ahead, Gail.
I was just going to say that, you know, it's not just the complainant that's involved in this. There's also usually an officer involved. And so to me, that is an impetus for the police department to do this as quickly as they can and to be reporting back to both the officer who's waiting for the result as well as the complainant. So I think that that's kind of inherent in the process. In fairness to everybody, is to get this done quickly and to report off quickly to both the officer and the complainant in a timely manner. So observation.
And if I may say, historically, these complaints have been handled as quickly as possible, especially when there is an officer that may be involved. So I think you're right, Gail. Timeliness is key, but I also agree that some sort of a monthly report on the status of the various complaints is appropriate.
And Lynn, I see you have your hand up still.
Yeah, I was kind of, if people, another, like I'm hearing that like talking about this being potentially a lot of work and like the board having multiple meetings and all that. One of the things that it could call for is something information managers, which is to say that if somebody files a report, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire board has to be involved in every step of the way. One or two, kind of like we're doing here with subcommittees, one or two people could be the liaison for that particular complaint process. And then it would really kind of be them that was doing more work and then reporting back to the larger board. So it would be a way to kind of divide duties so that the whole board isn't meeting on every single thing every single time.
Okay. And Ben has his hand up. And then Brian after that.
I'll push back. Can you hear me okay? I know I joined.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'll push back on that a little bit, only because if two people have insider information or know more about a case than somebody else and they're able to discuss that, I think it puts the board at a disadvantage when the time comes to actually review the whole case as a whole. If there are two or three people that seem to have a different perspective because they've been getting updates the entire time versus the entire board seeing this incident and having to review it all at the same time, having that information put upon them at the same time, they're all looking at it with the same fresh eyes and perspective. That's my only input on that.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Ben. And then Brian has his hand up.
Well, I was going to say exactly that. And then I guess just one thing in addition is you do want to be careful. And this happens in my own day job with sort of providing information to people, before everything is really done. So people start making, that's what the investigators do when they do their work. So to have other people who are also kind of getting information and looking at it, and we just do as human beings, we come to conclusions. So I think it's, you want to do your best to ensure that when the board, because of its role of making recommendations and decisions, it has a fairly full amount of information for that process. And I think this is where you get into some of those issues. It's not exactly the same around kind of being an advocate or an ombuds for a complainant versus being the body that is kind of making decisions and recommendations at the end of that process. There's going to be some mixing of that, but you want to try to keep some clear lines to the extent possible and reasonable.
And then kind of moving through the document on page 2. So the citizens review then does their investigation, and then they put out a response to the review that talks about, how they'll issue a final report, and how that report can include really all kinds of different recommendations, anything from discipline suggestions for the officer, changes in policy, potential changes in policies or procedures, and then more kind of out of the box things like, restorative justice sessions or listening sessions, or you just never know what's going to come out of these complaints. So we should leave kind of the door pretty wide open for developing different responses depending on a wide range of situations.
Brian?
Sorry, I'm talking today. When I looked before, I'd forgotten to just say this now, talking about the internal investigation review. There are a couple things that were a bit concerning, even though they're addressed in here, is about sort of no time limit. I understand that. And I think then it's kind of, well, what is that review for? If you're looking at something that happened 5 years ago, what is the, it's not going to be the same as reviewing a complaint that just came in. There's a fresh investigation. So you probably want some clarity on that. And then also, again, there's something about information from whatever source. I think you want to be careful about third-party information and hearsay. If there's a newspaper article or a blog post that talks about something, that may be important, but it's also, that can also undermine a sense of credibility if there's not some sort of guidelines about what will be considered and how it's considered. I think that can also be a flag for people. On the one hand, people feel like, yeah, we're really considering everything, but on the other hand, what's the provenance of that information that you're considering?
Okay, and Stu has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think this section on the response to the review creates an us versus them situation. I think the role of the committee or the board should be to review the report that the police generate. If you're not happy with the report, you ask for more information. You work with the PD to grind it out. I don't see this board coming out with a special report that says, well, we totally disagree with the police department. They really screwed this one up. I don't see how you get any collaboration or cooperation in a situation where it's suddenly us versus them. That's not going to work. It's simply not going to work.
I think, though, that if this board released a report that said, in this case, we totally disagree with the BPD. We think they screwed up left and right. And here are our recommendations for moving forward. I think the police department, this part of the complaint process is you're going to have to hear something negative they're going to have to hear something negative about themselves.
But that should be part of the review process between the board and the police department that's presenting the investigation to you. I think the goal is to come to a conclusion that is collaborated and cooperative, as opposed to stepping outside and not giving the PD the opportunity to complete the work that you think is necessary. That becomes combative, and I'm afraid that would not work well. That's just my.
Hi, Clark again. Sorry to keep jumping in like this. I think Stuart is correct, but I've always felt this committee that we're putting together should be a review of their PD findings, and if the committee feels there's a area of non-concurrence with the PD findings, a citation of why that non-concurrence is there to be forwarded to the select board and have the select board go back. I don't think the committee should be communicating or butting heads, so to speak, with the PD. I think my perception is that these non-concurrences or concurrences will go to the select board for the select board to look at the content of the police report and the content of the committee's non-concurrence, you know, substantiated by specific documentation in terms of policy or even, you know, violations of the law or whatever case may be. And the select board looks at it, you know, then can go back to the PD and say, hey, these concerns were brought to us on the basis of your review or your investigation, and we support or don't support their non-concurrence. But I think that would be a way to pour oil on stormy seas, is to not be, you know, us confronting or this organization confronting or questioning the PD, but passing our non-concurrence to the select board, and in their capacity, go back to the PD and say, you know, we looked at this and there's some ideas in here that we support or don't support, and here's our thinking and what we recommend happen. And, you know, I don't want, you know, this committee to be seen as, you know, the sword of Damocles or something hanging over the PD's investigations. Again, I apologize for jumping in. I don't have the capability to hand raise up here.
No, feel free to jump in, Clark. Thank you so much. I know you're kind of struggling out there. So we're going to start with Brian, and then I have Marsh as well.
No, thank you. I don't want to duplicate anything Clark said, or Stu for that matter. So I guess what I will add a couple things. One is I think that perhaps some of the impetus behind this is really having and demonstrating independence. And the board can be independent and still be collaborative. So there's a way for the board to exercise independent judgment and still have a process where there's some back and forth with the police department to see if, you know, again, as I think Stu said, you know, we want more information. What about this? Why was this? Asking questions. It may ultimately lead to non-concurrence. But the other thing is, I think part of it is how you think about it. I mean, this could be a long thing, so I won't do it long. And if it's unclear, I apologize. But I think about body-worn cameras. Now, some people look at body-worn cameras as a tool for accountability in a way that means that, let's say there's an incident, the officer has body-worn camera footage. Should the officer be able to see that before they write their report? Some will say, and there's real disagreement about this, but often people say, well, yes, because you want the officer's report to be as accurate as possible. Others will say, no, you want the officer to write the report and then look at the body camera footage to see if the officer is telling the truth. Now, there are situations where that latter is appropriate, but as a general practice, I would say the former is better. It's not so much about gotcha, and it's more about, you know, how do we do this as well and as accurately as we can? And I think that's sort of parallel to the approach that this future body could take. That it's really about how do we get to the best answer, as opposed to, you know, our role is to kind of review you and call you out when you make mistakes and make that, and sort of let the public know that we've done that. And through that level, that type of accountability, things will get better. Things can get better without it before you get to that point.
Yes.
I'm talking too long. I apologize.
Yeah, you're good. And Marsh has his hand up.
Well, and I was just looking, I was going to ask Brian to say something, and maybe something more about some models of how boards and police departments do this collaborative work before the report is completed. That would be helpful.
Okay, well, very briefly, it's all, you know, like everything in oversight, there's a million different ways to do it. I can tell you in Cambridge, what we do is, in my role, which you probably won't have, as a staff person dedicated to this, I check in with our professional standards unit, and in non-COVID times, we sit down and meet monthly in between the monthly board meetings, go over cases, and I look through what they're doing and flag things I think the board may have a concern about. And so then when it gets to the board, there's more of a chance that they've addressed things that the board may bring up. And then when the board deliberates in executive session on the cases and reviews the report and all the materials, the investigation, they can decide that they want more from the police department. You know, again, there's specific things in our ordinance and our rules and regulations that are very specific to our model, but that idea that usually they deliberate and they agree with the findings, but they don't always, and they may send it back for more. Sometimes they really just say, no, we've heard everything and we just disagree, but that's rare, because usually through that process, we're able to come out with something that, again, after the police have done their investigation, the board reviews it, it may go back for, can you find more witnesses, or can you look at this part? So, but again, there's dozens of different variations on how it's done.
I think Gail has her hand raised as well too.
Yeah, I would just like to concur that I don't, I think this needs to be kept in a collaborative manner. And I think if we're saying that the committee should function independently of the select board and the police department, that doing a report and handing it off to the select board is probably not the best way to go. And I think in the philosophy of quality improvement, the goal would be to go directly to the police force if there are issues, to the chief, and say, we need more information. I think it would be a terrible injustice to our police to put a report out in public or to the select board based on what we have, if indeed the police department left out a couple of critical pieces that they forgot to include in their initial report that brought them to their conclusion. So I think it's only fair that this board works directly with the police department to come out with the best possible outcome for the complainant and the officer involved. That's it.
And Sue has her hand up.
And I would agree with Gail's analysis. I disagree with Clark's idea that somehow the select board would be the ultimate judge. This board is being formed to do that work. And it can do it. And there can be disagreements within the board members and the PD. But the ultimate goal is to get a report that validates or doesn't validate the complaint and comes up with a solution to a problem, whether it's disciplinary action, or whether it's a change in policy or protocol that arises out of an instance that should happen. This board has to be collaborative, and it has to be, I think the intent is to have it be the final word. The police do their investigation. This board would then either accept, question, potentially they could reject the findings, but that's where it ends. I don't think pushing it into the political arena gets you any better answer.
Thank you, Sue. I'll raise my hand just because I have a comment and I forget sometimes I jump in without raising my hand. So I'm trying to be better at that. So I think when we first met, when we did all of our training, I heard from all of our members the word collaborative and really wanting to have a collaborative board. So I think that is definitely one of the things in all of our minds. My other thought is, I like how, the thought of us working independently from select board, Bennington Police Department. What happens if we get to a point that we can't resolve something? Just out of curiosity, what's typically done in those situations? We can't come to a resolution between like the Bennington Police Department and the committee.
I'm sorry, I don't know if that was a question for me in
It's
particular.
for whoever. I
Okay.
wasn't sure, like, what's the next process? Has anyone run into that, and what typically happens?
One of the things that could potentially happen is the complainant can go and get an outside lawyer. If they're really not happy with the outcome of the complaint, that's one possible direction that they could go.
And I was thinking too, on a board level, like say the committee, once it's formed, and the police department, say the police department issues their final and the complaint, the final resolution and complaint. And the committee says, no, we don't agree with that. And they go back and forth and no resolutions ever made. Is there anything after that? Besides the complainant can hire a lawyer.
Well, I think if in fact at the end of all of the collaborative efforts that are being made, you still have a disagreement, then I think the board has a duty to let the public know that there is a disagreement on this particular issue. And that I would find it hard to believe that would happen a lot. Because everybody's goal is to resolve complaints in a mutually successful manner, but I suppose it could happen.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just happened to occur to me as we were talking. Like I assumed that we could hopefully come to some resolution without getting to that step, but one of those curiosity things. And I see Marsh has his hand up too.
So one of the options there is to get into a public fight, which we've seen in the newspapers all over the country. And well, that certainly is not our goal.
Oh, right. I
Absolutely.
go. Clark?
He said
Yes,
absolutely.
no,
Oh, okay.
absolutely. That, you know, we're not interested in becoming a public spectacle, which kind of is what I was leaning toward. We sit here, you know, this committee, whatever form it comes in, has a non-concurrence or significant disagreement with the police's findings. Do we just sit there and it's up in the air? Well, we don't agree to the police. We agree to disagree. I don't see that as good governance. If there's a significant gulf between the two opinions, there has to be a mechanism to narrow that gulf or to bridge it, because we just can't say, oh, our final report is we agree to disagree. That just doesn't sound like good governance to me.
And Gail has her hand up too.
So I'm just thinking that there probably would be a point where this would be bumped up the chain of command for the police, correct, Stu?
Normally, yeah, I think normally a complaint comes in about an officer's conduct or actions. The chief of police would do the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
No, but. no.
And then report to the committee on what the investigation found. There isn't a higher authority unless the incident involves the chief of police, and then that goes to the Criminal Justice Council.
But doesn't the chief of police report to you, Stu? Aren't you part of,
Yes. it
Wouldn't
reports
that
to
be the
me,
next
and
layer?
especially, yes, that's true. But in this particular case, as I understand these boards, they really are meant to be I'll call it a sounding board for the results of the investigation on a complaint against an employee of the police department or the conduct of an employee of a police department. I can mete out disciplinary action under the union agreement we have. The manager is the only one that can suspend or terminate an employee. So if that recommendation comes to me from the chief due to investigation, then I've got to look at his recommendation and decide to take action in that manner. If that is a solution to a problem, and you folks are aware that that is the solution that's being suggested, I don't know why there would need to be any more than that. And Brian has much more experience on this than certainly I do. I just find it hard to believe that you could end up in a complaint where the board has suggested going back and looking at additional information that at some point you all couldn't agree that is the solution, that is the resolution of the complaint, and that becomes the final answer. Gail's question is a really good one. I have no idea what happens if there is such a rift between the board and the police department that there is no resolution of the complaint. The police can make its finding, and probably the complainant will actually bring a lawsuit of some kind.
Yeah. And I'll just say I can comment on that, but I know Ben raised his hand, so I'll wait.
Oh, I just want to quickly address, common practice would be more for a subordinate, so a sergeant or lieutenant to do the investigation. The chief typically would keep his hands off the investigation because he'd be reviewing the final report of that. So, and again, keeping with the same idea of this committee, rather than him having details or anything like that of what is going on through the investigation process, he stays out of it. It gets investigated by, we have a couple of sergeants that have gone through internal investigations trainings, as well as lieutenant. It would get investigated at those levels, and then the final report would be put on the chief's desk. He would then read that report, and then and it would go from there. Just to clarify that.
Thank you, Ben.
Interesting.
Hey, and Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, I thought I should raise my hand, not just talk. So I think one of the things that, again, this is beyond the scope of this body, but partly it's having more of an understanding of what it is that is in those reports and what it is that the board will be seeing and reviewing. Now, again, that's to be determined. It will have to also comport with Vermont state law and all of that. But it's not just that the board is getting a 2-paragraph report. I would imagine saying, we looked into this, we talked to everybody, we think the officer did everything properly, there was no violation, thank you very much. Depending on the depth of the report and the investigation, the board would be looking at and considering a lot more information, whether it's dispatch reports, perhaps investigative reports, if it's something about a police investigation that people had a concern or complaint about, or if it was a use of force, there would be other information. So the board would be looking at factual information. Now, that doesn't mean that, because we're all human beings, there's always implicit bias, things are written from a certain perspective, but really the board should be reviewing enough information that it feels comfortable, not just with a finding in a paragraph, but being able to read an investigative report that talks about what was in the investigation, how it was done, and then also why the determination was made. What was, what's the standard? Is it, preponderance of the evidence? Is it beyond a reasonable doubt? Most likely not. All of those things. And that's a big part of why training is important, because there's rightfully so been a lot of discussion about training so people understand the community perspective and what officers are trained to do. But there also is training on actually how to understand investigations and investigative reports and how to make a determination about whether an investigation was thorough and unbiased. And so I think you have to keep in mind that these determinations will be made based on quite a bit of information. The amount of information I can't speak to, because that'll be specific to your situation in Bennington.
So I know Lynn has an awesome point to make because we've been talking about it, but we
I
only
know.
have a 1-minute warning. So just a
Well,
quick
I'm
thing.
dovetailing right off what Brian was saying about training. I have some awesome news to share with the group. I'm so excited about this. I was talking to Julio Thompson at the Attorney General's office earlier this week about something completely unrelated. But he was telling me that the state really is recognizing that towns all over the state are trying to put in various different forms of citizen oversight, advisory, whatever you want to call it. And they really want to support that. And one of the things he asked me for is, as we're going through these conversations, if we come up with kind of a wish list of things that we would find helpful for the state to provide to us. And he said that one of the things that they're looking at providing now, they're looking at developing a training and providing it for free to people across the states, community members across the state who want to participate in these kinds of oversight or advisory boards. They would be willing to provide training on how an investigative process works and what the laws are and how, which that would be lovely, because that would take the onus off us for both developing the training and paying for it. And so that's like one little problem solved. But then also I'm putting out there, because he really seemed really kind of sincere and excited about this, that as we're going through, if we find any other trainings or resources or whatever that we would like them to provide, they are really open to hearing about that.
Great.
That
And then
sounds great.
I know we are quite excited to hear about it too. And then I'm just going to start wrapping this up just because we're right on time. So doing great time wise tonight. So the next agenda item is the composition subcommittee.
So we started last week, and I think you all received a copy of our revised, updated proposal. That should have red ink on it. Maybe we could talk
Went
about
out as
the red.
black and white.
It's black and white. Shoot. Okay. It has, okay. So then I'll just go through this and highlight the things that our subcommittee changed in response to your ideas or in response to discussion. In the first section on diversity, we added in after age 16 and up with a hope to have one youth member. In our discussions, requiring a youth member felt like it would leave things hanging. It may not be, we can find a good youth delegate, a youth representative. And we wanted to leave the definition of youth fairly open, hoping that 16 would get to somebody who would have some maturity, but maybe the youngest person that would be ready to put in the time this requires would be 23. And they might be a youth, the youth member. And it might not be there would be a real youth member. We look for one and try to find one, but might not be possible. Any comments on that? Okay.
Sorry, I'm muted. Lynn had her hand up. I don't know if she still has. a
Yeah,
comment.
yeah, I do. I have a quick comment about that.
Good.
I've had both in the conversation with Julio Thompson, it came up, and with somebody at the Human Rights Commission, it came up, and both of them gave me kind of like a word of warning. And it kind of puts us in a catch-22, because on the one hand, we want to seek diversity. But on the other hand, if you give yourself too many boxes to check, so to speak, you can kind of paint yourself into a corner and wind up with, you know, a board that's almost entirely white, just because you've checked off the age box, the gender box, whatever. But then you experience a drift towards kind of one demographic anyway. So, and the warning was that just about kind of painting yourself into a box or into a corner with these kinds of requirements. And
So-
they didn't have any real good advice for me about how you balance going at, trying to seek diversity and not painting yourself into a checking the box corner. So I saw Brian shaking his head too. Maybe you can clarify what I'm
I
trying
think
to
I'd
say.
like to just say a word about what we are trying to do, and then happy to take input. Remember, this section is seek a diversity in the group's members by age, 16 and up, with the hope of having a youth member, gender, sexual identity. So all these things are setting before the select board goals to seek. Now, the particulars of it, I think, are great. None of these are, you have to have one person of certain socioeconomic status or whatever. We're encouraging the select board to seek diversity. Brian, I'm ready to hear you.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll just say quickly, I think in general, I agree with what Lynn was saying, and the way I would put it is maybe even just putting the expected attributes first, I think, because ultimately the board has to be able to do its work. And you want all these attributes, but in a sense, the most important thing about the composition is bringing together a group of people that has the ability and the wherewithal and experience in different ways to do the work. So, I mean, just thinking about, confidential personnel documents.
Yes.
Just to be honest, how many 16-year-olds do you feel comfortable, believing that they've got to have life experience and wherewithal to keep everything totally confidential?
We talked about that. That's a concern. Yeah. And certainly moving the expected attributes, that is like the third section here, moving that up to the top, I think is a great idea, because that's really what's most important. That's why we talk about them as expected attributes in contrast to seeking la-di-da-di-da.
Marsh, I have the copy with the red ink. Would it be helpful if I share it?
Sure.
Okay, let me see if I have the capabilities, and we're going to give it a shot.
I have an adjunct question. The screen just flipped around.
Were you able to see it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Good.
Great.
Oh, yeah. Are there, Brian, this is Margay, are there any, there have to be some precedent for people on a committee like this, permanent committee, to sign confidentiality agreements?
Yeah, it varies. Many places do. I mean, in some ways, I think when people are appointed, I assume they get sworn in. And in a sense, they're kind of agreeing to do it then. Some places do think it's good to have a specific agreement about you will keep these things confidential. I mean, they're required to by law, but just to have people do that affirmative thing. I know in Cambridge, when I brought it to our city solicitor, her advice was not to, because we don't have any other boards or commissions, including boards that deal with confidential information, sign a confidentiality agreement. So, I mean, I was thinking it was a good idea, and it felt problematic to our city solicitor. So, as always, there's no one answer, but people do it in different ways.
Okay.
So I think it does raise the question about 16 and you know, the question about confidentiality came up in this context. You know, when you're 16 years old and you go to a discussion about a controversial issue and your friends say to you, so what happened, you know, or what do you think? It's tricky. So the age thing is there. And I think there was also discussion about, we have in here in the bottom, a strong commitment to strength. Whoops, no, where was that? Demonstrated experience maintaining confidentiality. I'm not just sure how. We had some discussion about how you demonstrate that. And I said, well, as a minister, you know, I had a lot of confidentiality issues to watch for. So I had a lot of practice with that. And I wish I could claim I was perfect. But those dynamics were in question. And this is the best we got. But with age in particular, I think that's a question that we may want to discuss as a whole.
Are people comfortable moving it up to 18? I'm just thinking people need to know if they are allowed to apply. Like if a 16 or 17-year-old wanted to apply, unless we put it in there, they're not going to be able to. Do we want to put an age at all?
What about doing something like, again, going back to this idea of having like subcommittees or division of tasks? What about having like a youth liaison so that they're, you know, a 16 to 18 youth liaison who maybe isn't involved in every hearing? They might not be involved in incident review, but they can be involved in those other kind of collaboration efforts, giving feedback towards policy, you know, other things that the group does.
So a non-voting member, would that person be non-voting?
I don't know, or maybe they're only voting. Yeah, I mean, maybe if we call them a liaison, then they wouldn't be voting, but we would still be able to hear their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Gail's had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh, I think I'm just resting my head. No, I do have my hand up. I would suggest that we really just try to keep it simple with a recommendation that says something like considerations for diversity would include age, gender, ethnicity, and just keep something general that, so we'd like you to think about these things when you're interviewing applicants.
So it's going to be up to the select board to decide if to let a 16 or a 17-year-old on. It would be the select board that would decide.
Yeah, based on who they have applying. And to me, see, to represent any of these, you don't necessarily have to necessarily be poor to participate, but if you're someone who works with the impoverished community, it's your advocacy. So I would think the same thing would apply to age, whether it's one end of the spectrum or the other end. If you have some parents who have worked with youth and teenagers and have an understanding or a relationship with them, or if you work with teens through another group that you work with.
Yeah.
I would just recommend that it would be considerations for adversity and applicants should include ... And
Brian has his hand up too.
Yeah, I mean, people have said a lot of things I might have said. So I would just say, you know, I think I would imagine that other boards in the town don't have age requirements. So, I mean, you know, and so I don't know that you need to have an age requirement, which people have said. But the other piece is that in terms of kind of having those perspectives, one way to think about it is that you have to have all those perspectives in the body, and that through people's kind of lived experience, it will come out and naturally inform things. But there's also a lot of critique of, and I've seen this in the city of Cambridge too, people feel tokenized, even as the idea, especially with young people, is to bring them on and have them be equal and have their voice. Often people end up feeling, especially young people, I'm a token, I'm only here because they think I'm supposed to tell them what everyone who they think of is like me thinks. So it may be more about having, if there's some need on something specific or even general, to get X perspective, to find ways to go out and talk to those people and bring that perspective in, as opposed to thinking those perspectives must be embodied in the membership of the group. That's all.
So what I'm hearing is we could just leave age and zap the red ink in that line. Is that okay for people? No. Since I'm not hearing any yells, let's continue down to the next red one.
Marsh,
Yes.
excuse me, in hearing past discussion, I think we fall back onto that situation. We're seeking not just, diversity per se in the flesh, but a diversity of experience and thought. So, to single out age as a mandatory element of diversity, I think diversity reflecting the community means just that. And if we have a couple of 17-year-olds who are very interested and express themselves well enough to be considered, that's fine too. But I think, again, there's was mentioned the idea of picking someone because they check the appropriate box is probably not really reflective of true diversity and the fact that you're just checking boxes. So I think maybe we have to just hang our hats on diversity, and with all these elements to be considered in diversity, but no absolutes.
Yeah, that's what I think that's the purpose of the way this is written, to seek a diversity in the group's members by age, gender, etc. So I agree with what you're saying, and I think if we just delete that red line, is that a problem for anybody else? Or okay, so let's go down to the next section where we have a little gap under domestic violence. We go to skill to review reports and identify trends that will inform board recommendations to and work with the BPD.
I have a suggestion that could potentially address in this red line that you just read about skill to review reports.
Mhm.
Also jumping down to expected attributes, those other ones that you have in red,
Mhm.
about communicates effective as listening as well as speaking.
Mhm.
VCIL is in the process of maybe making a recommendation to the town kind of more broadly, but it can also be included here that in any of our advertisements, invitations to join anything that the town is running, that wording something along the lines of, if you would like to participate and need an interpreter, translation services, reasonable accommodations, or other supports, please contact, and then have a name of a specific person and a specific phone number, so that if somebody does want to participate and needs any of those things, they have somebody to reach out to who can work with them about providing that, so that it is accessible. And I think including that wording somewhere in the invitation or in the job description or whatever kind of solves that problem of the wording potentially being exclusionary to people with disabilities or people with other kinds of language barriers.
So Lynn, could you send that sentence, and I think we can just append this after in this section, add this in the section, because it helps open the door for people to participate while making sure that we're headed in a way that we can work well. So
are other people comfortable with that potential solution or that potential wording?
Gail has her hand up.
I don't object to that. My thought is, again, if we get too specific, to me, we're asking the select board to consider the skills and to communicate effectively. I'm sort of hoping that they would, if someone said, no, I don't, English isn't my primary language, but I have someone who can help me with it, or how could you help me with it? I mean, I think if we keep it general, then it's up to the select board when they're interviewing to say, well, they can communicate effectively. It may not be in the way that we're used to, but they can.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we need to emphasize that a whole lot, but I don't object if you wanted to put that at the end as an addendum, as consideration for the select board. I don't have an objection to it.
So Brian has his hand up and then Ben after.
Well, just very briefly, when I read that, I didn't think of it in terms of kind of ability to communicate in that sense. I like around accessibility. I was thinking someone who was kind of willing to communicate, with people, like that kind of effective communication, listening and speaking, kind of back and forth, giving and taking. But maybe that was incorrect, because what I was hearing from Lynn was much more about making the process accessible to people, whatever level of communication they may have due to ability or, so it seems like two different things to me.
Okay, and Ben, you have your hand up?
No, agreed. There's more to communication than just speaking a language. As I think a lot of people found out in their interviews, where they were easy, they could understand what the officer was saying, but there was breakdown in communication as far as how that communication is happening. So and maybe that was partly to do with how that is also replacing what was on there earlier from the last meeting, which was I believe it was a working understanding of the English language. That wasn't necessarily to replace, I'm right on par with what Brian was saying, where there's more than ways to communicate effectively than just being able to speak the same language.
And Lynn.
Yeah, I'm just bringing this up because a lot of times when people with disabilities, like for example, somebody who has severe dyslexia, when they're thinking about, should I apply for this position? And they understand that, reading is going to be a big part of it. They think, oh, well, I'm not invited. So, or when they read, communicates effectively, listening as well as speaking, somebody who's deaf might read that and think, I'm not invited, which is why I'm suggesting adding this wording. So not taking out any of these attributes, but so that if anybody looks at that and says, oh, geez, I don't have those qualifications, there's no room for me in this forum, to let them know that, yeah, well, we could make room for you. There are ways to make room for people. So that's why I was recommending that wording. If that makes sense.
Yeah, one of my thoughts is I do work with interpreters off and on, is having the resources to make sure we have interpreters that are professionally trained, especially if we get into legalese stuff. We want to make sure that the translation is coming across effectively. My other thought too is when we say that they have someone to help them, like, do we want their kid being involved? Like if it's a teenager who maybe speaks English and a adult who has different primary language, like I think aiming towards, if we're going to do it, putting funding into a source with professionally trained interpreters would be important too. Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
I think ultimately one of the things that is going to end up coming out of this is kind of a resource list that can go to all the local government agencies about how you contact an interpreter, how, where you can find these accommodations, what kind of, just a resource list would be really helpful, because I think if you're not versed in it, it can be really intimidating to say like, oh my gosh, how are we going to figure out how to get this person in the door? Both literally and figuratively sometimes. So, but a resource list would be really helpful. And that's something that can definitely be developed.
I'm gonna caution us, we're actually at the end for this part. I actually went over a minute. I got a little, enthralled in that conversation as well.
Could we identify what the next steps are and move into our agenda for next week? Is that okay with everybody?
So I guess my question is before we, as we're leaving this, if people have additional comments that they want to make about these areas of this particular report, would you email me? And then I'll bring them to our next subcommittee meeting, which I think is early next week. And then we'll bring back any changes that seem, and you can look it all over for the final decision about this section. Is that okay?
That sounds good to me. Are we expecting to be able to vote on this at the next meeting?
I would hope so. I mean, you'd have the right to amend it before approving it, but we'd bring back a document that we'd be ready to have you vote on and amend if needed.
Great.
But it's up to you to, if you have suggestions, please don't wait until the next meeting to bring them up. Send them in an email and then we'll put you on. Thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna stop sharing. The other things I had for next week is final drafts of purpose, scope, and the composition.
I'm not going to raise my hand, but I'll just say, just a reminder that, or I think I told someone that neither Cami nor I will be able to be on 2 weeks from now because we will be at in Tucson at the NACOL annual conference. So, and again, that's part of why it's been so challenging for Cami to do stuff and participate. But not that you need us for every meeting, but just know that you won't have us as resources for that meeting.
Okay,
I'm
thank you,
sorry, I'm
Brian.
taking notes, and right before Brian spoke, somebody, I believe it was either Margay or April, said something about agenda items for next week.
Yeah, it was having the final drafts to vote on for purpose, scope, and composition.
So if we're going to take a final vote on purpose, which I'm all in favor of, I'd ask that the other subcommittees review the last version of the purpose statement and give us feedback if, because as we're trying to edit this down, we want to hear from you. Ooh, this is really important, or what, why can't we drop that out or whatever?
If I could jump in, if in fact Brian and Cami cannot be at the next meeting, then we can meet face to face.
I'm for in person. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Will Clark be able to make it to that one?
Are we talking, I understand that's the 16th, correct?
The
Correct.
16th, yes.
Here you go, Bruce.
Sure. I will be back in town for that.
Uh-oh.
I'm all on board with that.
No, I'm not
Great.
reading.
Does anybody oppose that idea? And is the room able to be reserved and tech support?
Won't let me raise your hand.
Are you-
Yeah,
I-
Because
we'll
we're not
get
a
the room for
panelist.
you.
Yeah, the room is probably not going to be a problem. Marcia's suggestion is a problem with regard to the open meeting law. I'm sorry to say that. This is Bruce at the tech support, but you can't have what is essentially a multi-person, you know, a full conversation with internally. You just, those are not the kind of conversations that can take place. So what each subcommittee can do is do their own work and then bring it to the next meeting.
So if people have comments, if groups have comments about purpose or composition, they
They have
couldn't
to bring
email-
it to the next meeting.
Okay, they couldn't email it to the subcommittee.
That's very close to having one of those serial conversations that ends up being an online conversation, and you can't really do that.
Okay.
You can't do that. That's the last of tech support, sorry.
That's okay. So it sounds like we're gonna make final drafts within our own subcommittees with the recommendations that we've discussed over the last few meetings on these meetings and the vote. Or it maybe, I don't want to keep pushing it out, but maybe it's the next to the last final draft. If there's something glaring that, you know, we'd like to address then.
So I'd like to suggest for that process, if we're going to do this all together, if it's possible, Stu, and I don't know if it is or not, for us to use the screen to edit the text that we're working on. I know we did this when we did the original town purpose statement or vision statement, where we could project on the screen what the text is. And then as the group makes suggestions, we can see it change. I don't know if that's possible, but that'd be nice if we could.
I'll see what we can do.
Okay, that's the best I'd ask for.
I'm wondering too, if I'm sharing my document, like sharing my screen like I did and editing as we go, that might be an option if we can't do it the other way as well too. And I know we're a little bit over time. We do have to get to public comment. And then if there isn't anybody, let's go back to our agenda and just finish that up.
Right now, there is no attendee other than Jonah, and Clark is listed as an attendee, but he's a participant. So we have no one out there.
And there's no one in the fire station either.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I don't see a need to do public comment.
Great. So final draft, anything else that we're thinking for the next meeting? Or sorry, at the agenda, I know besides the final drafts.
I think maybe just a quick review of our final timeline on the next agenda again. I think we want to just keep taking a pulse on that.
There was some discussion when a couple of us emailed Brian and Cami about the scope and the purpose and duties. It seems like they're in the same territory and that they need to be consolidated. Is that?
Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, well, two things. And I'm sorry, before you got here, both Stu and Clark, Stuart, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the screen, Marsh and Clark. It's amazing how our brains work.
I'm Stu too.
I apologize because we've just been slammed. I sort of just said that. So, we can try to address, and often it'll be just me, these questions in the meetings, because it's just hard to keep up with all the subcommittee stuff. But I mean, in my mind, there's a difference between scope and purpose. I mean, the purpose is
No, that's not what I said.
Okay.
Scope and duties and powers.
Wait, okay, so
our group worked on duties and powers, and Lynn's group, I mean, the group that Lynn's a member of, worked on scope. And we came up with some different documents and similar and different ideas.
Yeah, you can think about it a little differently, but I apologize because this is what I do, doing things on the fly.
Okay.
Yeah, duties and powers, I mean, that's what you're going to do. And it's, in a sense, I think that's within the scope. I mean, the scope is kind of the container, and then the duties and powers are how you actually do what's within the scope. So it may just be, and I have looked at those documents, but not thoroughly, and I haven't put them side by side. It may be that one or both of those subcommittees, the container group is kind of also getting into like how you do the things inside the container, and the duties and powers group is coming up with things that may or may not be within that scope container. So that's the best I can do.
So Lynn, do you think your group would feel comfortable taking what we did for duties and powers and throwing it up in the air and see which falls in? Great.
Okay, so I'm putting in the notes that the scope subcommittee is going to kind of take over duties and powers.
It sounded more like they were going to look at the duties and powers and see if they fit within the scope.
Okay.
And whether, and to be honest, they could, the scope committee might say, oh, they've got all these things that we didn't have, so maybe the scope needs to broaden. Or they may say, you guys are coming up with stuff that really doesn't fit within, and vice versa. The other committee might say the same thing. So Stu, oh my God, it's amazing. Marsh, your committee might, it just says Stu on the screen. Marsh, your committee might also want to do some of that if you've got time in your board,
I'm really amenable to giving it to Lynn. And then if there are things that you think if there are things that your group thinks, don't really belong in scope, but they do belong in the document, then that would be great. Send those back to us and or send them, bring them to the meeting and we'll rechew them.
We're at time.
Yeah, all right. Clark, did you have any comment before we end?
No, no, other than the fact, again, my heartfelt apologies for the discontinuity of popping in our meeting. Everything seems to be moving along, and I'll be there on the 16th.
Oh, great. Hopefully you stay warm up there. I'll be sending you warm wishes.
Oh, no, I'm sitting in front of a space heater here as we speak.
Well, good. I'm glad. It sounds awfully cold for me out there. So, okay.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Did
Thank
we
you very
decide
much, folks.
the next meeting is in person?
We
It
will
will now
do it
be
in
in
person,
person.
yes.
In person, okay.
Yep.
So I make a move to adjourn.
Yeah. The second that, if possible, from
Gotcha,
afar.
Clark.
Well done.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Happy
Take
Nicole
care.
meeting.
Thank
Take
you.
care, folks.
Yeah.